From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. Earth, fire, wind, water, heart, go planet!
Oh, I thought you were going to make an Earth, Wind, and Fire reference, but then you changed course midway, and I was on board again. Not that I'm not on board with Earth, Wind, and Fire. They slap, but I love me some Captain Planet.
Right. This will be familiar to many of our fellow listeners who are based in the U.S. Captain Planet was an animated series about these kids, these plucky young upstarts who wanted to save the world with the help of their superpowered friend, Captain Planet, the eponymous star of the show. Captain Planet's going to come up a couple times in today's episode. The topic of our show today has been on our minds for a while because the facts are in. Regardless of where you live, your country has probably at some point been ground zero for a serious environmental disaster. Oil spills, hurricanes, mass extinctions, forest fires, flooding, droughts, you name it, something has happened. And right now, at the time of this recording, people across the planet have tried to propose any number of solutions to these problems. And unfortunately, very few of these initiatives have met with great success, and the world continues to degrade at an unprecedented pace. You know, for some people, maybe in the crowd today, this means that drastic new tactics are needed. If you can't change the system from within the system, then the system itself becomes your enemy. So certain groups have decided to conspire to act outside of the law in service of what they see as a greater environmental good. And some folks will call these people heroes. Other folks, as we'll find, will call them terrorists. Here are the facts. Before we talk about the concept of so-called ecoterrorism, we have to lay out some depressing information. The kind of thing that has made me actively subscribe to the philosophy of optimistic nihilism. Doesn't matter who you vote for, doesn't matter what kind of music you like, what kind of food you eat, or what kind of clothes you wear, the environment is screwed.
Yeah. I mean, for all intents and purposes. And you don't have to be like a super activist in this space, you know, some kind of hippie living in a treehouse to agree with that point. I mean, it's pretty clear that there are some very, very, very serious and in many cases irreversible problems with the environment.
Well, yeah, we learned, we did an episode not long ago, maybe actually it was years ago now, but it was about specifically that, what the oil companies knew when it came to climate change and the effects that their companies were having on that whole process. I mean, it's pretty much an accepted fact that humans have at least pushed forward the changing climate on Earth.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of the arguments attempting to debunk studies about that were paid by the corporations who were at least partially responsible. They knew, they very much knew, and they just decided their Q4 profits were, more important than their grandchildren or the people who come after the current generation. Man-made climate change is accepted as a fact. The conspiracy is that people tried to cover it up. So today, the real debates are, the real active debates in this sphere are the extent of the damage, like you're alluding to, Matt, like humans did something, how much did they do? And then secondly, what is to be done about this, and when do humans need to get off their collective keisters and do something? Yeah.
I mean, you have, international agreements and climate accords and, emission standards and things like that. But you're right. Even stuff like that is super politicized and often, a little bit toothless in terms of how much accountability the nations that are part of those agreements actually have.
Mm-hmm. And we're not, this is not necessarily a hit piece on the authors of those declarations or the proponents or signatories of those agreements. you're right, Noel. For many, many years, the problem of environmental degradation was seen as a political opportunity. It was politicized. People who were out to make money, consequences be damned, were quite successful leveraging problems of human psychology, right? And now the idea of your opinion about environmentalism is inherently wrapped up in your concept of a tribe and your membership in a tribe. But the thing is, like, okay, so people who are fighting for conservation, at least in the US, were often accused of being, quote, far left radicals, or the accusation was they were unfairly attacking people who are just trying to earn a living, put food on the dinner table, et cetera, whatever kind of political rhetoric was in vogue at the time. And I
Or
thought
dare you say attacking a whole part of the country, right? Like
Right.
middle America, is under attack by far left radicals because they're trying to get rid of, coal mining or, impose all of these draconian standards on all of these stuff that people just want to earn a living. I mean, and of course, at some level, there's truth to that, like in terms of people needing to earn a living, but at what cost?
Right. Also, economy is a religion. So I'm just gonna keep saying that until somebody proves me wrong. But you guys are absolutely right. This shift, this politicization, is very interesting if you are a student of history, because a great many conservation movements in the U.S. and abroad had fairly patrician, politically conservative roots. Like the aristocracy would preserve land for their own purposes usually, or think of Teddy Roosevelt, who was a huge proponent of conservation and environmentalism.
But he also liked to murder, things a lot.
True, he did. But right now, a lot of large institutions are making tons of profit because people are not aware of this historical context. Right, the conversation has evolved. Things weren't always this way, sort of similar to how the Democrats and Republicans, so-called, of the 1800s were way different than the people you see calling themselves that today. You have to look deeper into things to understand them. And regardless of where you find yourself on the political spectrum, arguments that politicize climate change are usually either, I'll say it, take a shot, cartoonishly ignorant, or they are made in bad faith to mislead credulous people. If you are listening and you are a human being, you need the same things as all the people that you love or hate or don't know across the planet. You got to breathe, right? That's one of the things. You want to eat food, which means you need arable land or access to someone who has that. You also need clean water. It's cool to have shelter from the elements. These are like the base. This is day one stuff, as they said in Workaholics. And the problem is just too big for any one single institution to solve it on its own. There are too many players involved. You could call them stakeholders or whatever, but we're not just talking about the almost 8 billion people who rely on the ecosystem to survive, which is, that's everyone. We're also talking about the institutions that these people have formed throughout history or will form in the future. Like they're huge private industries that, move billions, even trillions of dollars, depending on how you slice it. And if you flip a switch and you say, no more plastic, no more CO2 emissions or something like that, they are going to tank. And they will drive millions of innocent people with them into the ground. Too much change too soon could be as dangerous as no change in the immediate future. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we alluded to that earlier in the episode, just when talking about the whole problem in general of making one massive change. And the other thing to take into account here is that every country that exists has its own kind of economy that functions based on the resources and what's available within the land and sea that they own, right? And if you try and make a sweeping change on every one of those countries and every one of those economies, let alone the global economy, you're going to have major problems there. The same ones you just described, Ben, where one company goes down or an industry goes down in a certain fishing, let's say on the northeast coast of the United States or, of North America, you're going to have major issues not only in that area, but then that's going to affect the rest of the economy and the fishing economy. Anyway, it's a bad example, but it's a major problem.
Well, and not only that, you have developing countries that are maybe just now starting to become, economic superpowers or are working their way up to it, and they're like, what about all that time that you spent polluting, and getting to get up and running? And now you're saying that we have to cut back because of all the, greenhouse gases you put out, like, over the years when we weren't? Like, that's not fair.
That's a point I want to spend some time on in a second. We are on this same page here. We might accidentally radicalize each other in this episode, folks, which is fine. So we've got the companies. No matter if you love them, you hate them, you think they're a necessary evil, it would be bad news if they all of a sudden had to flip a switch and stop. The economic consequences would be unprecedented. Those almost 200 UN recognized countries, they've each got their own vibes, often contradictory goals. They're not going to be super great at cooperating. And then, especially now, to steal a line from Fox News, now more than ever, you have incredibly wealthy individuals, each of whom also has their own agenda, and they are capable of affecting these conversations at every single step along the way. If you are listening to today's show, odds are you can't do a thing to stop any of those three categories of entity. You can try to make your voice heard, but the traditional channels, it's going to be tough. Not everybody gets to be Greta Thunberg, there's a prisoner's dilemma here at play as well. No one wants to get left behind. Logically, no one wants to commit to a decision or a policy that will leave them at a disadvantage. Very basic. Why would you? I was trying to think of some examples, and I just came up with some hypothetical ones. So I was trying to think of like a really big corporation, and I just pulled Unilever out of Scully's cranium over there. And let's say you're Noel and Matt, and you are the heads of Unilever, and that a lot of, let's say you make a lot of stuff that uses palm oil, and that the palm oil industry is very damaging to the ecosystems in which it's harvested. But you also know that if you decide to get some good PR and say, okay, we're cutting out all palm oil products, and we're an international corporation, so we're going to make a splash with this, what's going to happen. If you do that, you're going to lose billions of dollars pretty quickly, and worse, your competitors are going to move into that space, lickety split. So the problem is going to continue, and you just won't be making money off of it. That is 100% what will happen.
Yeah, it's like Lego, for example. They're not going to stop using plastic, but they did make a gesture in saying they're going to phase out plastic bags in their packaging. So it's like that's sort of the middle ground of PR opportunity there, because your Lego, it's such a hit to your supply. What are you going to make it out of? Like seashells? You got to figure something out, and that's a much more long-term problem to figure out a material that they can actually integrate into their supply chain to replace plastics and oil-based products. So instead, they're like, well, we know that this is a problem, but we're Lego. we got to have your Legos, so let's just, make the bags out of paper. I think McDonald's even is like, their Happy Meal toys are not made of plastic anymore. They're made of paper, but they're also going to still have plastic straws.
Right. Yeah, it's true. It really is a pickle, because the folks who are in charge of these decisions are trying to mitigate damage, but they're trying to mitigate it in a way that is sustainable for their enterprise, if not sustainable for the planet. And the scale of time, that is one of the biggest complicating factors here. Let's say you're Paul, Mission Control Decant. You are the ruler of, let's give Paul Transylvania. Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay.
I also love that he's the ruler. He's just the ruler of it,
With a very tasteful iron fist, Mission Control rules Transylvania. And as the leader of this country, he knows that his nation depends upon certain industries that are damaging to the environment. Maybe it's mining, Maybe it's oil, rare earth minerals, whatever. Maybe it's mono agriculture. It just exports one thing, and that's what most of the arable land is used for. So Paul Decant says, okay, I could end these industries. And if I do, then Transylvania will play a role in making the world arguably a better place decades from now. I won't be around to see it. Instead, I will be the scapegoat. I will be public enemy number one. I'll be the guy who tanked to the economy and put the population in the poorhouse and out of work. That also is 100% the calculus that a lot of world leaders use, and they're not wrong, is the problem. They're not wrong.
That's why they still mine asbestos in parts of Russia, you know? Because there's that, what is that whole town? Asbest, I believe, something like that. That's literally their one industry. And everyone that's there doing that job is okay with doing that job. So they're going to keep putting it out.
What else are you going to do? You know, these are broad kind of, aside from Russia, which is a real world example, these are broad hypothetical examples, but we guarantee you they are based in fact. And so now the question becomes the same old question. Everybody knows there's a problem. Everybody knows something needs to be done. Can't we all just get along and agree on a solution? Record scratch, no. Actually, no, we cannot. We will not. As discussed earlier, many of the countries and entities that are driving these conversations about environmentalism and preservation, they're coming from a place of immense historical privilege. Like, of course, and this is not a ding on our British or European friends in the audience today, but think about it. Of course, the UK and Western Europe can get kind of high and mighty about the conversation around alternative energy, because they're still sitting pretty off untold trillions of dollars of historical profits, from the coal power of the industrial age to slavery to colonialism. All the other sins of the past made them a lot of money and gave them a lot of influence, and they still have it. So, of course, if you're an up-and-coming country, you'll sometimes hear them referred to as the BRIC countries. It's a little bit of a misnomer, but it's an acronym that stands for Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Countries like on that level. Of course, you're going to be frustrated if some grand poobah from the UN comes to you and says, okay, yeah, destroying the planet was all fine and dandy for us, but you guys are going to need to find a different, more expensive route to our level of success.